What is up, everybody? It is your host, Real American Politics, back again with episode 2 of what could very well be the most hyped up series on this channel on my Discord ever. What if Ross Perot won the 1992 election? And today, we're going to be taking a look at Ross Perot's first 2 years in office and what the midterms would look like with an actual third party. Ross Perot would form the Reform Party after he won in 1992 in this scenario, and things would be completely different. So, let's get started. So, President Perot has 4 major things he's going to do in his first term. 4 to 5 major things. Especially in his first 2 years. Which will affect the United States very long term. And we'll touch upon this in a later video. But this is very important. These 4 things that Perot will do as president. Based on the fact what he promised and the fact I do believe that Ross Perot is probably the best candidate to actually get things done. He has a weird mix of more left-wing policies with more right-wing policies combined into one mesh of a platform. So I believe Ross Perot would be able to get things done, and it would help America greatly. So this graph kind of resembles one of Perot's biggest requests, biggest things he wants to do. Get rid of this deficit and balance the budget. And as we know in our timeline, Bill Clinton did in fact balance the budget at the end of his term. He was actually getting a surplus. Well, you saw what happened after Clinton went off. And you really look at it. If it was Ross Perot instead of Bill Clinton, who ran the budgets, I firmly believe that the budget would have been a bigger surplus than it was in our timeline. Because, Perot was more harsher on the deficit, on the debt, and really with Ross Perot winning, the deficit and the debt would be an actual issue that candidates would actually focus on, and not just spend without actually affording it. So this is one of the bigger things, because you won't get in the mess we're currently in with the debt, with I think it's 120% debt held by the GDP percentage. It's a ridiculous percent, and that alone is a big change. Like, we could seriously currently have a balanced budget right now. Like, yeah, we maybe have a small deficit because of COVID, but, we don't have this ridiculous debt we have. And that may single-handedly prevent many of the struggles in the 21st century when it comes to the economy. So this is one of the bigger things he would do. He promised to raise the gas tax to help pay for a lot of his investments to America, and this is a long-term play. A lot of the stuff he's doing will shift a lot of states in completely different directions. But this is just the spending and the debt side of things. We haven't even talked about what Ross Perot's really famous for. And that is, of course, trade. Yet everybody knows NAFTA, and how Ross Perot was the only one that said that NAFTA was an awful trade deal. It would kill American jobs, especially manufacturing jobs. And look what happened. 1994 was when it passed. The first year it went up. Manufacturing jobs went up. A couple years later, it went up a little bit. Then after that, it cratered. And that was before the '08 depression, or recession, whatever you want to call it. So NAFTA was an awful trade deal. It shipped their jobs overseas. It led to more immigration. And it hurt us long term. With Ross Perot as president, NAFTA wouldn't have passed. If anything, the only thing that would possibly pass is some kind of like USMCA kind of deal that Trump passed. And yes, you would probably see U.S. manufacturing go down eventually to around 16 to 15.5 million to 2016, 2020. But you would never see it get down to 12 million. And in many states like Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, their communities wouldn't get destroyed like in our timeline. Like, yeah, there would have been a slow decay. It was since the 70s, but it would have been, it would have been finally after around, a couple years of decay, it would finally start going back up. Well, that's not what happened with NAFTA. NAFTA destroyed countless communities in Middle America. But with Ross Perot, I highly doubt that manufacturing jobs get really below this mark, and really would probably raise to 20 million at one point. So, that's another big thing. A lot of these things are shifting America. Long term, this will change America. And also, you won't have the god-awful trade deficit we had with Mexico. Billions in deficit. It's just a joke where we were at. And it was just so bad what it was, and NAFTA, you clearly tell, had a big effect into it. First year of NAFTA, oh, well, another $20 billion in trade deficit. Now, there's another thing that Ross Perot would do kind of indirectly, but kind of hinted at. And that would be go after China. Now, this graph is a GDP per capita with China. And you notice how in the mid-90s, that's really when China had the surge as the future economic strong powerhouse of Asia. Well, again, Ross Perot took a harsh stance on China, very similar to Trump. And you notice how the rise began after Bill Clinton got president? I still think a rise would have happened. That's ridiculous to say it wouldn't. But 1992, that's when the rise really took off. And with Ross Perot, you probably see it, yeah, of course goes up, but at a very similar pace to India's. Because we wouldn't just ship our jobs overseas, we would actually punish companies that do it. We wouldn't just have free trade everywhere. And this could hinder China's ability right now. Of course, they're still going to be a powerhouse, but I don't believe they would be the single biggest manufacturer in the world. Like, of course, I think they would be a big manufacturer, but I don't think they would have as much influence as they have now on the global economy. Mostly because Ross Perot would take a harsh stance on China. You would probably see the GDP per capita reach around 4,000 by 2010 and around 6,000 by 2020 or so. But it would be a dramatically slower rate because all it took was one okay president to make a bad decision on China. And look what happened. So with that all the way, there's also one more thing that I know a lot of Republicans, conservatives are so worried about. Immigration. This is a big issue now. But Ross Perot was not really known for immigration. But you look at what some of the things he said about NAFTA, you can clearly tell where he was going with immigration. He was very anti-NAFTA, not for free trade also, but also for immigration. He kept saying that NAFTA will encourage mass immigration. And look what it did. It went from almost 20 million immigrants in the United States to 31 million in just 10 years. And that was with the 90s. And again, Ross Perot would be one of those presidents that would say, no, we're not going to do NAFTA. And that would cut that number down to probably 25 million at worst for America. And with Ross Perot actually being harsh on immigration to an extent, that could be even lowered. And you wouldn't see this dramatic skyrocket of immigrants to the United States of America. And again, you know how America is changing because states like Georgia, Arizona to an extent, becoming more and more left-wing. Well, this wouldn't happen because you wouldn't have this flood of immigrants between the 90s and the 2010s of 20 million new immigrants. And this would also help the average American family out because there would be higher wages. And this alone, again, would change so much. But that's enough of the policies. These are the major things that Perot would do. Now the question is this. What would the midterms look like with three parties? Well, this is what it would look like in the House. Now again, I don't have a map for the districts and stuff because that's kind of hard to find, and plus, that would have been a pain in the arse to deal with that. But essentially, looking at this map, I took into account where Ross Perot would do best in, alright? And that'll be the Great Plains, states like Wisconsin, Maine, Middle America, Texas, Arizona, states like that. And pretty much about guesstimated what this House map would look like. And Republicans would have a plurality, but not a majority. And that's important. Because in this timeline, the Republican Revolution still does happen, of 1994. But it would be overshadowed by the fact that a third party would have gotten at least 70 House seats. That's big. And their stronghold would, of course, be the Great Plains, the Midwest, and a little bit of the Northeast. And this would shift demographics a lot. As you could tell, the Democrats are kind of screwed. Like, right now, according to this map in the House, their stronghold would be Texas, Illinois, New York, not even California. Because, quite frankly, I do think reform would take a bit of the House seats over from the Democrats, and it would be a complete mess. So the Democrats would begin to slowly realize that this new Democrat thing, even though we tried with Clinton, didn't work. It's not going to happen. So this is huge. And you wouldn't see the rise of corporatist Democrats. People like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, I highly doubt they would rise in this scenario, but that's for a future video. Point being is, Democrats would be forced to change. They can't be corporatists like Bill Clinton was to an extent, or Hillary Clinton, Obama. So this would change a lot. And notice Republicans' new stronghold would be a mix of everywhere. Like, a lesser extent, a little bit of the South, the West would be the stronghold. That's just so mind-boggling, but that's what it would look like with a third party. In the Northeast, this would be the stronghold. Pretty much North would be the Republican stronghold, while the Democrats would pretty much have West Virginia and Texas as their major strongholds. And you know how big of a shift this is. That we don't have, like, the Republicans, building a safe House seats, right? Safe elections in the Deep South. Like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana I don't think would become those safe Republican strongholds. And again, that's going to change a lot. But for now, we got to get to the other thing. We get the point. Nobody has a majority. And Reform Party is a major third-party candidates. And they would probably side more with Republicans on some things, Democrats on the other. So it's important that this happened. But of course, the most important thing is the Senate, and this is what I determined the Senate elections would look like for the Democrats, Republicans, Reform Party in 1994. A complete failure for the Democrats. Like, states like California would flip because I believe the Reform Party would screw over the Democrats there. States like Virginia would flip Republican, and it would just not look good for the Democrats. The Reform Party, I do believe, would pick off 4 or 5 states: Minnesota, Dakota, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, mostly because I do think these are the states they would do best in. States like Michigan and Wisconsin would be just too big of a lead for the Democrat or Republican for the Reform Party to win. So yeah, this is where things begin to snowball for the Democrats, because where do they go from here? They pretty much are screwed after this election. And this is what the current Senate would look like. Republicans would have 55 Senate seats, the Reform Party's 4, and Democrats 41. So as you can tell, things are definitely changing. And things are just going to get worse for the Democrats from here on out. Like, they're not going to die, they're not going to become the Whig Party, but they're going to have to change in a very interesting way. I'm not going to get into how they change, because that's for a separate video. And anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed episode 2 of What If Ross Perot Won 1992 election. And yeah, this was the 1992 to 1994. Next video will have the presidential election of 1996. Very interesting stuff will happen. And yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, hit the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, and yes, thank you for watching. Hit that join button down below, and yes, God bless you all, and I hope everybody has a phenomenal rest of their day or night. Thank you.